welcome everybody to this IMS 2023 technical paper online forum where you can find out answers to your questions about the paper submission process. I'm Pat Hindle from Microwave Journal, and I'm here with the IMS 2023 TCP chairs, Dominique Schroes and Pete Zampardi. Welcome to the session, and if you have any questions, enter them into the Q&A and we'll get to as many as we can. We do have some questions that we got pre to this webinar, so we'll go over those next. But first, let's do a review of the review process, and I'll start with Dominique.
Well, I'm assuming that all of you are working hard on doing your research for your IMS paper. I assume you have already seen the IMS 2023 call for papers, and otherwise go to the website to look it up. Then when you feel ready to start writing your paper, first download the appropriate template. And we are looking for 3 to 4 page papers. In other words, one of the questions was like, how final does the paper have to be? And there I would say, well, focus on having 3 to 4 pages. And also requirement is a double blind. Double check your paper to be sure that it's double blind review compliant before you actually upload the paper. And then go to the submission site and submit your paper. And then by February 1st, you will know the result of your paper submission.
Okay, Pete, maybe you can help us out with this slide.
Sure. So this year we've got 4 paper competitions. 3 of them should look very familiar. The student paper, industry paper, and advanced practice paper. This year, the new thing is we added an early career paper competition. And the idea is to target young professionals that haven't reached senior status, but are no longer students. So there's something that they can at least apply for a best paper award for. And that's where the 10 years comes from. You know, that's how long you have to be a senior. It's open to primarily the target was industry, but it's also open to postdocs. So this is a new thing we're trying to do to get more of the young professionals involved in the conference and hopefully submitting papers for competitions.
Okay, so we have some questions that we got before the session, but feel free to enter some questions into the Q&A and we'll get to as many as we can. So let's start off with, are there any tips or tricks that you can give us when it comes to preparing the figures and graphs for the papers?
Yeah, what I would recommend is that if you're going to make figures for the paper, that they should tell part of the story. You shouldn't just use the figure to fill space. As part of the figure, the caption, don't be afraid to tell the whole story of the figure in the caption. Don't make it so that the reader has to rely on the text. That's probably the best advice that I could give on what to do to figure out what things you want to make figures out of for the paper.
Okay, and we hear a lot about the double-blind review process. Can you guys explain how that works?
Well, what it means is that you as an author, you will not know the identity of the reviewers, but on the other hand, the reviewers will also not know your identity. And so it means there are a number of expectations that you have to incorporate in your paper before you submit it. Like not listing your name and affiliation below the title on the first page, but also the way of referencing prior work. And so on one hand, you should be complete in representing the state of the art, which includes prior work by your group, but you have to phrase it in a third person, like of fashion. And on the IMS webpage, we have a document that gives more details on well, how to prepare your paper for well, to meet the double-blind requirements.
Okay, and so the due date is December 6th, so remember that. And this question pertains to that: is a full and finished paper required for this December deadline?
So Dominique sort of hinted at this before. The paper requirement is 3 to 4 pages. And if you're going to do 4 pages, and this is all spelled out in the author instructions, if you're going to try to do a more complete paper, if you're going to target the journal, selection for the microwave, MWTL journal, then your 4 pages can be 4 pages, but the last column can only be acknowledgements and references. If you're not choosing to participate in that competition, you can use the 4 pages however you like, but it's got to be between 3 and 4 pages.
Okay, and next question, what does the process look like after the paper is submitted?
Well, then a very busy period starts. So first, a group of people will double check the papers for the double blind requirement before it actually gets sent out to reviewers. And then the papers get submitted well before the holiday period to the reviewers. They have about 1 month time to review the papers. And then at the end of January, they all come together to make the decisions on the papers. And then, like I already mentioned, by February 1st, we will announce the results on the paper decisions. So, well, it may be good to be aware that each of the items on the call for papers, it represents a subcommittee, and the subcommittee consists typically of about 7 persons. So each of these 7 persons will review all the papers that are submitted to that topical area. And so that is happening between the middle of December and the middle of January.
Okay, and can you share with us the criteria for IMS 2023 paper submissions?
It's listed in the call for papers at the bottom, and there's 3 criteria and I don't remember them off the top of my head. I know one is originality, technical value to the IMS community.
And the other one is clarity and quantity. So you should have an original ID, but it should also be demonstrated in a quantitative way. So if the ID can be fabricated and you can have measurements, well, at IMS, we expect that the measurements are part of the paper. And everything has to present in a clear way because that's part of, well, one of the 4 criteria.
Great. And how aggressive should we be with the SOA in order to justify the motivation or the necessity of the proposed solution?
It's an interesting question, the word aggressive. So it's important, very well, essential to position your research relative to the state of the art. And the 7 people I talked about, they're all strong experts in that particular field. So if you're not fully representing the state of the art related to the topic of your paper, they will spot it and they will include that in their assessment of your paper.
Yeah, and I guess to follow up with that, you have to convince those 7 people that your paper has some novelty or state-of-the-art results that justify it getting published at the conference.
Okay, great. And the next one, how much should we emphasize the proposed solution? How many times should we mention the novelty, and what section should we mention it in?
So what I would recommend is, you want to demonstrate the novelty in the abstract, you want to demonstrate it in the introduction, and you want to reiterate it in the conclusion. The rest of your paper is proving that it's novel and your solution works and justifying it. But those are the 3 most important places to stress the novelty.
And next question, what feedback is available for the submitted paper if it's not accepted to improve it for next time?
At IMS, it's usually the case that no feedback is provided to rejected papers. And that's also what we will implement, because in the end also, so your paper is assessed relative to all the other papers that are submitted to the same subcommittee. So if the paper is rejected, well, either it's weak or it's weaker compared to the other papers. And that's, well, a bit harder to give feedback on. And also, all the papers have to be discussed in less than 1 day. And certain of these subcommittees, they can have 30, 40 papers to discuss. And then there is not adequate time to write down what has been discussed orally. All these discussions are orally, and then it's well, not written down in detail what has been discussed.
Okay, and then we have a couple of specific questions here about topics. We have done a characterization of dielectric properties of different materials of the silicate family at terahertz frequencies, where there seems to be a gap in the literature. The technique employed is terahertz time domain spectroscopy, is not novel in itself. However, the results are relevant for 5G, 6G millimeter wave designers. Would those results be of interest to the conference?
Oh, well, I can take it.
Yeah, I
So
think Dominique should do that one.
yeah.
She's the measurement expert.
Yeah, so the dielectric measurements at whatever frequency, they are within the focus area of IMS, that's for sure. But we would mainly look for new measurement techniques, and indeed time domain reflectometry as such, it's existing measurement approach. But maybe in achieving your measurements, you had to adjust your measurement setup or apply certain mathematical techniques for calibration or de-embedding, and there may be novelty in those aspects. But if it's using an existing measurement setup and just measuring a different type of material, often such papers, they do not make it, because again, they are intercompared to other papers that are submitted to the same subcommittee. And they may have both novelty in the measurement technique and in the results, and then get priority as compared to your paper.
Okay, and then the other one was, it's not very clear if antenna designs are included in the scope of the conference. I'm interested in submitting antenna design for glacial environmental sensor networks. Is this topic of interest within scope?
If it includes actives, so just the antenna itself probably wouldn't be accepted. But if it's part of a system or uses active devices, then it would be considered for IMS. Is that fair, Dominique?
Yes, indeed. So simply a passive antenna, that's usually not considered part of the scope of well, Microwave Theory and Technology Society. But when it's combined with diodes, switches, or active circuitry, like for example, also phased arrays, then it's within the scope of IMS.
Yeah, and reconfigurable surfaces, which are kind of becoming a thing too.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so to be clear, and if it's just an antenna, there's the APS conference that's appropriate for that. Okay, next question. Do proper topics need to be approved in advance? Is there a proposal required prior to submission?
I'm not sure what's meant with that, because in our call for papers, we have 32 topic areas. So we are hoping that with these 32 options that we are covering the fields, the scope of well, microwave theory and technology. But there is also a topic, I think it's number 32, other areas. So if you feel your topic is not a good fit for any of the first 31 or so subcommittees, be welcome to submit it to 32. And then we will have a look at it, and we may decide to assign it nevertheless to one of the other subcommittees. But there is no need to contact us up front.
Okay, we finished all the pre-submitted questions, so we're going to go out to the audience questions. So if you have a question, enter it into Q&A box. So is there any chance that the paper deadline gets extended?
It's not the first time I get this question today. No, because like I was explaining, well, on one hand, that I didn't explain yet, but on one hand, for IMS, we get a lot of paper submissions, and it may happen at smaller conferences where they have less number of paper submissions and that they decide to extend the deadline. But also due to all the steps that need to happen between the moment you submit your paper and that we send out the decision in the beginning of February, it's not possible to allow any shifts.
Yeah, there's already a schedule established, and you never should count on that anyways.
Mm-hmm.
Another timing question, should I submit my paper as soon as possible, or is it better to wait closer to the deadline?
You can always re-upload a new version, so you can already, but I would not upload like a very early draft, but once you have let's say, a decent draft, why not? Then you can already upload it. Because once you upload, you will see you have to go through a whole menu and make some selections and decisions. And that may require some thinking by you, and it would be good to do that well up front, as opposed to do that the final 5 minutes before midnight Hawaii time on December 6th.
Yeah, and I think along those lines too, it's beneficial to download the author instructions because that gives you a lot of information of what you will need to upload the paper. So you want to collect that first before you start the submission. So at least you have everything and you can get through the process quicker.
Okay, another question. Should an idea be patented prior to presenting? Does presenting or publishing at IMS prohibit patenting? And do you have any examples?
If you are submitting something and your legal team at your company hasn't looked at it first, I think they're probably going to be a bigger problem than IMS is. I would recommend that you use your corporate, IP people to review it and let them decide what's patentable. Even if they don't file a full patent, they'll at least file, sort of a temporary one to at least place a hold on it. Once you've presented it in any form, your clock starts ticking in terms of when you could have to have the final patent filed. So it's not advisable to submit something when it's questionable whether it should be patented or not. You should always go through your IP team and use them to help you make that decision.
Good advice. Okay, next question. If we have some results that can fit both RFIC Symposium and IMS, which one should we choose?
Well, they do realize that we're representing IMS, right? So they should definitely submit to IMS. I guess the question there would really come down to, which conference are you really planning on attending and spending more time at? And what do you maybe view for yourself as what might be more prestigious to get it accepted at IMS or RFIC? I think it's very similar review processes, so you're not going to get an advantage there. My personal preference is you submit it to IMS, but also be very careful about reading the call for papers to make sure that it does, which one does it fit better is the other advice I would give.
Yeah, there's a lot of topics and they both list them, so that helps.
Yeah. And then to add on, it's about where you would spend most of the time, but also which audience would you prefer for your work. If you feel you will get more feedback and more exposure by submitting your paper to one versus the other event, well, that's another consideration that you can make.
Okay, and next question. Will demonstrating state-of-the-art results at 100 gigahertz for a PA make it to the selections even though it doesn't demonstrate a new circuit topology?
Pete is the PA guy.
Okay, so let's go through what it has to do in terms of how it's going to be graded, right? So if the result is a really good result, the question is going to be, if you're not using a new topology, that's okay, but what are you doing? Is it a demonstration of the use of a technology that people haven't applied to that before? You have to show some sort of novelty to it and convince people that it's worth publishing. Circuit topology is great for circuit design part of it. Technology capability is just as valid to show the technology is capable of it. So but it's got to demonstrate something unique compared to what's already been done, would be my opinion.
Okay.
And then for circuit designs, usually a comparison table is expected. So where you compare your design to related designs. And then what Pete was mentioning, that should be clear from that comparison table.
Okay, and next question, which we kind of touched on, how do you update my submission if I make changes to it?
I think it's like re-uploading the file. So once you submit, you get a code such that you can re-enter the site and continue to re-upload new versions up to the deadline.
Okay, and next question, are you seeing a lot of papers from international colleagues?
Yes.
It's a global show, international in the name.
Yeah. Indeed, I do not have statistics in my mind right now, but There is a substantial proportion of papers submitted from out of United States for sure.
Okay, next question. Does the proposal submission deadline of December 6th apply to the full-length 3 to 4 page submission?
Well, like it's written in the call for papers, we expect you to upload at least 3 pages. So for sure, it should be more than like a half-page abstract, what you may also see at some other conferences. But it does not necessarily have to be your final paper. But of course, the assessment will be done based on what you submit. So sometimes authors add, okay, we will add additional measurement results by the time of the final paper. Usually the subcommittee members then not take that into account. So they evaluate the paper as it is submitted. So if certain results are lacking at that point of time, it would negatively impact the chances to get the paper accepted.
And I think the other part of it is once the papers are reviewed, there will be reviewer comments that get sent back to the accepted papers. And then there is another deadline for when you have to have your full complete paper done. So you don't have to have the full paper done by December 16th, but the more complete you are, as Dominique said, the better chances of getting it accepted. But after the review process, there will be comments from the reviewers that they would like you to address, and there will be another deadline for when you must upload your completed final paper. And that's in the call for papers, I think, is where it's listed.
Okay, another question came in. Should we include the acknowledgement section, which might hinder the double-blind review process?
I would not include it for the first submission, but I would leave that for the final paper. If the paper is accepted, of course.
Okay, a couple more did come in. I've designed a circuit for a PA, but I haven't fabricated and completed it. Is it worth submitting?
If there are no experimental results yet, probably that paper will not make it in IMS. It's due to the competition, like I already explained.
Yeah, that's a pretty hard and fast rule most of the time. Will papers be reviewed again after extending from 3 to 4 pages? Will you receive comments again?
Well, I don't know whether the person is talking about MWTL track or about the pure IMS papers. So for the papers that are accepted, we will be sharing the feedback from the reviewers, and then the aim is to enhance the paper. And we may do spot checks, but it will not be systematically be reviewed again. Whereas if you opted to be considered for MWTL and you are considered for MWTL, you have picked out for that, then there is then you also have to implement changes, and those will be reviewed again.
Okay, I think we've handled most of the questions. Any last words of advice from you guys, Pete?
Start doing your papers as early as possible. And if you work in a company that has long cycle times, or you're doing defense work where you've got long cycle times on the approvals, try to get that done as soon as possible. It will make your life easier and less stressful.
And I would say the same, but then more oriented to the more junior researchers. So there is a difference between doing the research and writing the paper, especially if you don't have a lot of experience yet. Very likely your advisor would like to do you multiple iterations, and then there needs to be time to do that. And so now we are about, a bit more than 1 month. So you should start writing the first draft as of now, I would recommend.
Thank you guys very much, Pete and Dominique. Good feedback and good advice for everybody to take. And everybody remember, the submission deadline for IMS 2023 is December 6th. And we thank everybody for joining us today. And we hope to see everybody in San Diego next June.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye, thanks everybody.